Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Confident Presence for Virtual AEC Interviews. My name is Troy Parkinson. I'll be moderating today's webinar. Welcome to this interesting, strange new world. Today, we really want to provide an opportunity for you to get your questions answered. And today, our panelists are Dean Lincoln Hyers and Pete Machalek of SagePresence. For over 20 years, Dean and Pete have been presenting and coaching AEC firms in interview prep, high stakes interview prep, helping their teams win over $4.5 billion in sales. They're also co-authors of Winning AEC Interviews. Today's activity is going to be very interactive, so we really do want to open it up to questions from the participants who are listening in here today. And let's get started by introducing Dean and Pete. Welcome, gentlemen.
It's great to be here.
And welcome, everybody. This is Pete.
For all the listeners out there, you can know that you are muted. So if you have cat noises in the background, as one participant said, or if you have children, as I do as well, who are doing distance learning, we've really entered a new time and a new space for this virtual conversation. So we want to be as intentional and focused in the next hour with you to get the most out of this time, because I know your time is precious at this time. So guys, let's jump right in with the biggest question of all. How has communication changed in the last 2 to 4 weeks, and how you present yourself virtually?
Let me start with this one. What we do in our working lives, especially, as architects, engineers, construction companies, we build spaces, and that space embodies a brand. And you come into the space, and there's the reception area and the front desk, and you can see people working in the background. And we create our brand in part through the space that we operate in. And that's what we experience when we go to our prospect sites. And then we come home to our natural environment where we can drop our guard, quit being a professional, and be a person. And that's our new environment. This is where we have to work. This is my house. It wasn't built for business. And now we're suddenly having to learn how to separate ourselves from a lot of the props and cues and branding elements. So the biggest thing that's different is it's hard to figure out how to represent your brand when you're suddenly separated from the space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one piece of good news about this, and one just reminder that I want to give everybody, is that it's not just you. It's not just the person on the interview team that is looking to win a job. It's also the selection committee members. We're all wrangling this brave new world of virtual communication, of speaking to cameras and connecting to people over vast distances, just with this tiny little circle on our laptop. So it's something that we're all kind of figuring out and all challenged by.
Yeah, and one of the things that we have noticed as well in our conversations with our colleagues in the architect world, the engineer world, and the construction world is that everyone is in these new dynamics. Many of you come from the various worlds, and actually this might be a good point for us to take one of our first polling questions. So what I'd like to do is launch our first poll question for all of you who are watching and listening out there. For those that are listening over the telephone and not able to participate, that's okay. For those who are watching, the question is, what industry do you work in? If you could start answering that for those who are able to be a part of the poll. The other question is how has the industry been impacted in your region? No impact, projects delayed, postponed, projects canceled, other. Maybe Dean and Pete, let's first talk about the impact that this technology has had. Do you have any recommendations or suggestions on which technology to use for these upcoming virtual interviews?
We definitely want to be careful not to try to be those guys. There are people who are the masters of applications and format. What we're trying to be is the guides to presence and presence under pressure. And I think we're going with Zoom right now as our main platform because that's what most of the AEC industry uses. There's some advantages to Zoom. It's a pretty stable platform. At least from a hearsay standpoint, fewer people are complaining with stutters and bad video. We've had a few more complaints about Skype. Skype has some interesting features like a background blur, and there's advantages to each. But I think right now We do training on WebEx, and we use Zoom for most of our meetings and webinars.
Yep. And we've also had some experience with Google Hangouts, which seems to have surprising limitations. In my experience, you get more than 4 people in on a Google Hangout, and all of a sudden people say, "Hey, I can't hear you anymore. I can't see anymore." But yeah, Zoom seems to be the most solid. And it's probably a good idea for us to acknowledge with the skyrocketing use of Zoom. Just recently in the news, there's been a fair number of stories about Zoom security. Apparently, it's somewhat contentious a little bit. The person in charge of the CEO of Zoom says, "No, absolutely, we are secure," and he's offering a reward to anybody who can prove that there are security issues. But there have been quite a few stories about security questions. So one thing that we do know is you can protect yourself fairly well, we believe, with the password option.
So one last thing about Zoom, we know that the Zoom people are working with architects and trying to study how we interview, and they're trying to bring more control. So maybe a way to think about it is over the next couple of months, this is going to be a scenario that's a lot like the meetings where you can't force the viewer to see a certain setting. If they want to be in gallery view, they're going to see all the little, the Hollywood squares. If they want to be in presenter view, they'll see a bigger video and a little string of smaller images along the top. They're going to probably around the fall, I'm guessing, be releasing new versions that let us control it more. So they're working with us, they're collaborating. So it's one of the reasons I'm excited about Zoom.
Well, one of the next questions that we want to jump into, and I'm going to just jump right into the Q&A that we're getting so far. We're going to bounce around a little bit on this call, but hopefully we're going to hit all the key points. First and foremost, I have a client who has chosen to do a conference call only interview, no video. I'm leaning towards sending them our PowerPoint presentation as a PDF and ask them to follow along. Do you think that's a good approach? Am I also going to send them any back pocket Q&A slides? So what's your recommendation for audio only presentations?
Yeah, let me jump in on that. I think that idea is actually a fairly reasonable one. And let me just throw out just kind of a general concept to everybody. And this is really for live interviews and virtual interviews. You always want to think of what will it take? What does it take to maximize my audience getting what I'm trying to communicate? What's the best way to communicate the information that I have to offer? And if there's a visual, if visual cues will strengthen that communication, then by all means, send whatever means you have available, send those visuals to the other person. And as you're presenting information to them, say, okay, now take a look at slide X or page X. But only if you predetermined, yeah, actually the communication is going to get stronger from that experience, not distracted by it.
I like how Pete's thinking about it. I want to add a couple of things to the mix. One is, I think this is a time, next 3 months, up to about 6 months, that we want to increase our dialogues with our prospects. Find out if they're open to different alternatives. Find out why they want to do it the way they want to do it, and see if we can have some dialogue to help create the best experience for you, the prospects. And of course, you're going to have to yield if they have a strong opinion about why they want to do it audio only, and that's fine. But we're finding some people are willing to talk with us and collaborate. Most of the time they've got their way, and then you just have to deal with it. So think strategically about what you're trying to show. Is this about demonstrating what a great experience we create working with you? Interaction is better. Is this about showing us as a polished team? Something more formal can be better, but you'll want to think about why you'd want it away and see if you can talk with them. I think there's going to be a certain amount of openness because they're lost as much as everyone else is trying to figure out this new venue to get the results they want.
One of the other questions that I want to piggyback on in this experience is this idea of backgrounds. What do we want for our backgrounds when we're doing presentations? Do we want virtual? Do we not want virtual? What are your thoughts, Dean?
I find this so frustrating personally. Now I got a reasonable background so that it looks okay, but this isn't my professional background. So I find it frustrating that it's hard to figure out how to make a team look like a team and give people matching backgrounds. I became convinced over the weekend that the virtual background is the way to go, and I was wrong. I created multiple SagePresence backgrounds so that Troy and Pete and I could each have a different one, but very, very of the same family, but it just doesn't work well enough. So I'm on video and my hair's gone. Now my hair's back. Now my hair's gone. Now an ear's gone. It's like I've got leprosy. And so, oh, ear's back. I guess I'm okay. And then I hold up my hand and 3 of my fingers go away. And the one that's left is the middle finger. And I'm like, okay, no virtual background. So give this like 6 months to a year and the technology is going to improve and the virtual background will become a viable option. If you all test it and it works for you, great, but we've had completely inconsistent results from the background, but it's coming and it's a good idea once it works flawlessly.
Right. So if we do have any recommendation at this point, it's to invest in some physical backgrounds. If you can construct like a screen, a branded screen for yourself and put it behind all the team members, have it be your brand colors, maybe have your logo on it, but don't have it so busy that it's distracting. That's probably a pretty darn good solution. Of course,
and we're probably going to do that one. We looked up $200, $150 to get a screen made. But what do you do if you've got a company of 900 people? Are you going to buy 200 of these? And and then becomes questions like, we should probably have a screen and then 2 lights. In film, you typically have a key light. It's coming from above and to one side, kind of like the sun. Then you have a fill light. So actually, I'm using the actual light from the side from my window as fill, and I've got lights over my head to kind of give me a key light. And then, then what do you do to light the background? So you could invest a lot in kits. A company of our size, we probably will invest in kits for each of our team members. But, we're not 300 people.
One of the other questions that people often ask is, where am I supposed to look? How am I supposed to be on the lens? What if I'm working and my team members aren't in the same room? So I'll take it as 2 questions. The first question is, how do you project a confidence and where do you look in a virtual interview?
So I'm going to start with that one, and then we've got to talk about the vibe part. Confidence is a really interesting thing, and there's some differences between this and what we preach at SagePresence in live interviewing. So I laugh about how many people have been told things like, if you get nervous, just look over people's heads. And we're like, no, look at them. Look at them one at a time. Really get to know each face. Spend a complete thought with each person. And now guess what I'm going to tell you? Look over their heads. Now I'm assuming your camera is above, like mine is up on the top of the monitor right there. There's some that are down low, some on the side. I am learning how to spend all of my quality time with that dot. It's like looking over your faces and looking into the little black dot that's completely unresponsive. It's the only way to simulate eye contact in this model. Now, give it 6 months, they're going to mount the camera inside of the screen. There's even talk of putting like 4 or 5 cameras, so where I look, I can make eye contact in different ways, but that's not the reality right now. So you're doing the counterintuitive opposite. You're looking into the dot, and occasionally you look down to see what people are doing. But imagine what it would look like if I walked up to you live to talk to you, and instead of looking at your face, I'm looking at your chest. This is the effect of looking at the screen. I want to look at you. So a big part of being confident is learning how to manage the vibe while you look in the lens. Last thing before I throw it to you, Pete, this is taxing. So this is my second webinar of the day. I have been staring into this dot for 2 hours, and it takes a lot of energy, but that's my commitment. I have to bring you the simulation of my attention. So you're looking at the lens most of the time.
Yep. Yeah, and a couple of details to add on to what Dean just said. So when you're talking, it's a great idea to commit to talking to the lens. You can give yourself permission to, occasionally look away, gather your thoughts, figure out what you're going to say, and then come back and speak to the lens a little bit more. Also, when you're not talking, when somebody else is talking, then you can feel free to look away from the lens, look down at the screen, watch the person who's talking. So allow yourself different patterns based on the different functions of communication. When you're speaking, reach out there and look to build a connection with the people that you're talking to, not only by making eye contact with the lens, but by actually appreciating the lens or actually appreciating the people that you imagine are on the other side of the lens. And when you're listening, feel free to move away from the lens, connect with the person who's speaking by really focusing on them and really listening to them.
Now, if I can hop in, I learned some things just from, now I'm seeing, in this particular webinar, I'm not seeing you, but in the one that I was in earlier, I was seeing the people. And one of the things I'm learning is that you need to look at, especially when they're talking, you need to look at the screen to learn what they're doing, but you can't just look there. So what I noticed is a few of the attendees who were listening to me were looking at me talking, but they kept making eye contact back up with me. And those who didn't looked like they were checked out. So part of not spooking your audience is, even when you are listening, continue to glance up at the screen, or up at the camera, even while you're paying attention to what they're doing. So it's kind of like the flip-flop. When I'm listening, I mostly watch the screen and I occasionally look up to the camera. When I'm talking, I look right into the camera, and occasionally I'll dart down to see what the images are doing. So they both sort of need to be integrated together, but in opposite proportions. So it's just something to practice. But it spins us into one other thing that's a huge issue that we're discovering. I was in a room of people working on one of these virtual interviews, and they all were pleasant people. We're busy, we're working. Then we get on the platform. And this was just before the virus went crazy. We started in room together and then went virtual secondly. Once we got to virtual, man, do these people look crabby. It's that RBF, I'll call it resting crabby face so that I don't have to say the B word. But everyone looked grumpy, disconnected, disinterested. And there's something about this medium that really amplifies disconnection. So when I'm not paying attention to the lens and I'm not paying attention, even if I'm studiously listening to what you're saying, we tend to look bored, checked out, disinterested. And then anytime we look away, or worse, if we're texting people at the same, you see all this distraction. So it's really hard to send texts to each other and try to hope that no one knows it. It's obvious. So we need to keep our presence up during the entire interview, whether we're the one talking or not, and then balance those 2 points of view when you're listening and talking.
One question that's come in from our audience is they've commented on the fact that we're all standing. And so maybe, Pete, you want to start first by talking a little bit about the importance of standing, and then Dean, share any additional thoughts you have.
Yeah, we strongly recommend that you present from a standing position. So in my day job at SagePresence, I spend a lot of time on the phone. I'm doing a lot of business development, and I know that I have more energy when I'm on my feet. I know that I'm able to be more present in my conversations. I'm able to express more. So I think the same has got to be true when you're interviewing. So it's not just how you feel, but what's most important is how you're coming across. and you want to communicate to your selection committee that you are absolutely devoted to this moment with them, you are absolutely committed to communicating everything you possibly can. So get on your feet, stay on your feet, unless there's some physical thing getting in your way. And you are definitely going to have more energetic presence coming through that lens.
So let's look at what some of the options are. So I'm standing, and Pete and Troy and I have already pre-worked kind of similar angles. We're similarly sized in the frame. And when you watch the group of other people, you've got people who are really up close, you've got people who are far. For some reason, you've got people who are like this all the time. And then what we've discovered is people who are sitting are usually closer to their monitor. So if you start using your hands, this is way too much. It's like slapping somebody in the face. When you stand, you can give yourself a little bit of a frame. I've got a little room. I can use my hands, and this isn't so much of a problem. So the only way to have something that simulates a standing presentation is to stand. Plus, it allows me to do things like I can increase the intensity by getting closer. I can relax by backing up. And this, it may create sound issues, so you gotta be careful there. But this is one of the things we're doing to cue each other. So when I wanna talk, and Pete and I have talked about this in advance, when I've got something to add and he may be going a several step path, I'm gonna come in and kind of give him a cue that I wanna speak. When I'm about to be done and I know he's looking for a place to hop in, I'll step back. So you can do a lot with this. What you need to do that I'm going to make a quick adjustment. I'm going to make it a little more level. I want it level so I don't shrink down when I back up. So I've pretty much got a reasonable little tiny 2-foot area to work within. And this helps. And if there's a standard recommendation about the height of this thing, I tend to like the camera at my mouth height. It's almost eye to eye, it looks eye to eye, but I found so far the best, look, you get enough presence being just an inch or two, my eyes are an inch or two above the camera, so I can look down at you, but only slightly. And this creates sort of a one-on-one experience. I mean, compare that to this. So, you know, I'm giving my presentation, or you really need to just try to create this stand-up energy and this look you in the eye kind of perspective. So camera about mouth height, give yourself a little bit of room and recognize where you can go in or out.
Yeah, think about it like this. Symbolically, you're positioning yourself as the selection committee's partner. You know, you're on the same playing field, the same level field as they are. You're not above them, you're not below them. They don't have more power than you, you don't have more power than them. You're on the same playing field.
One add-on to that conversation is this idea of headsets. We had one participant ask, what about headsets? They say they sound better when they're using a headset, but otherwise their voice is a little echoey, but they're afraid they might not kind of look funny if they're wearing a headset.
Mm-hmm.
I think they look like a producer at that point, you know, and I like the idea of looking like a presenter, and I might invest in a better microphone, but it would be a lavalier or a standing microphone. I don't want the headset because I look like mission control or something. So you want to be careful about what the things do to the image. And then you want to recognize that everything in that family of image is kind of bigger. It's a bigger impact on the screen. So a guy that we just talked to, he came on the screen with a headset. He looked like a radio announcer, but he was an architect. So I don't see how you get the personal vibe right if you.
Yeah, so far we've found that our laptop microphones will do the job, but over time, I think it probably will be wise for us to invest in lavalier microphones. I haven't done the research yet, but I have heard somebody on one of my favorite podcasts recommend an SE30 or an SE130. Like I said, I haven't done the research myself. So that's Sam Elephant 30, Sam Elephant 130. Apparently, those are particularly good noise canceling microphones. There can be, there can be people doing dishes in the room next to you, and the microphone will only pick up your voice.
Give it 6 months and watch it change. There will be a lot of evolution as people. And by the way, keep in mind when investment comes up, investing, this is not going away. So the 80-20 rule, this is good enough. People are, you take a hit in the ability to establish good presence, but it's good enough. It's over the 80%. So suddenly they're going to say, wow, why should we fly this person in from Chicago? Yeah, just be virtual. Why should we drive to the meeting? So even after normal returns, the new normal will bring us back into the room for interviews and meetings, and they will also keep doing this. This is just not going away.
To answer a couple of quick questions for you that had some technical questions about how and what kind of computers we're using and how we're using them. None of us have standing desks right now. What we've done is we've retrofitted our computers in our homes on tables and stools and books to make it to get to that height. If you have a standing desk to do that, that's great. But if you don't have a standing desk at home, then it's time to get a little bit creative and use your engineering skills to position your computer accordingly. The other thing that's important to recognize is that we are using Mac laptops right now, the three of us are, and we are just using the audio and the video directly from the laptop. So we have no extra audio, we don't have any earbuds, and we've been able to manage all of this currently through our audio, through our laptops. I'm gonna give you guys another question here that's coming from our audience, which I think is also a very good one. The question is, should we have, this comes from Chris, should we have a different sensitivity to presentation duration when doing visual or virtual interviews versus presentations? If traditionally a live presentation is an hour to hour and a half, are virtual presentations going to be less than that? What do we have to keep in mind when we're on the virtual experience?
Great question.
You're going to give an answer to that, Pete?
Sure, I will hop in on that. So a couple of things. What we've found is in some 90 minutes seems to be a nice outlier. You go past 90 minutes and people get really, really antsy. And then a micro answer inside of that bit, larger response is this. You really want to keep your monologues short. You want your audience to be as active and responsive as possible. We do believe that selection committees in general are probably going to, for the immediate time being, we believe selection committees are going to stay relatively traditional and will not be asking for any unusual formats. They'll probably be saying, okay, you have 45 minutes to present, and then there'll be 15 minutes of Q&A or something like that. And you're gonna want to check in with them frequently. You're gonna want to do these short little presentations where you make your point and then you ask them, do you have any questions about that? Or how did that land? Is this making sense? It's a great way to keep them with you, make sure that you haven't lost them, and to keep it as conversational as possible given the circumstances.
Now, also, there is no one answer to how long an interview is. So you take an architecture interview in the Midwest, the average one gives you 20 to 30 minutes, sometimes 45 for a presentation and 15 for Q&A. I like Pete's idea that maybe we're going to try to blur those together more and keep more interaction going. So maybe we're changing the format of the time. But in California, a lot of the interviews that we get involved with, they give you 15 minutes for the presentation and 10 or 15 minutes for Q&A. The whole thing's a half an hour. So my point is there isn't one answer yet. But I would say your goal is to try to make it as close to what you've been doing as possible. This isn't the best time to reinvent the interview. The next 3 to 6 months are about trying to take what we already know and make it work here. And I think that the value is it can be a little bit more like a discussion. I mean, we're in a webinar with 200 people watching, so right now we're going to be one way. But your interview is probably going to be a little bit closer to a meeting. You want more interactivity, but how can you talk about something as complex as the design or construction or engineering of a building in less than an hour? So most of the Zoom meetings we've been doing, most of the interviews have still been inside that hour format. But trying to create more interaction inside of it might be a better place. And then let's check in 3 months and see if there's new norms and standards coming out. But right now, try to plan based on what you already know.
One thing I'd like to do is we've had a couple people say that they've seen the poll, they haven't seen the poll. I want to take a moment to launch another poll, and let's see if this works better for folks. And if this goes, I'm launching the poll now, so you may see it in your screen, in the lower part of your screen under polling or Q&A. For those who are in the chat panel, feel free to tell me whether or not you're seeing this. For those who are answering the poll, please put in the chat panel where you're seeing it at, because there may be a distinction between.
For what it's worth, Troy, I'm seeing it as a pop-up. I wonder if some people aren't seeing it because they've got pop-ups blocked.
Yep. Okay. So that could be. If you've blocked your pop-ups, it may not. It should pop up on the screen. But
you can slide it. I thought it was, yeah. So I just discovered I can slide it out of the way because it comes up right in the center for me. Okay. But yeah, definitely answer that. And keep in mind, as we experience, look at the difficulty and the questions that are suddenly coming up the moment you try to do anything different. So I'm glad we're doing it because we want to learn from you. But in terms of your interviews, this isn't the best time to go crazy with new features. Maybe do the split screen so you can see your PowerPoint. Maybe try a virtual whiteboard. But generally speaking, the more you try to do with this format in its infancy and in your new experience with it, the more trouble you're going to create for yourselves, as we're finding out.
Right.
Well,
go ahead, Troy.
Well, what I was going to say, for those who are taking the poll, it does slide around. So if you have the ability to move the slide, you can move it off the faces because it does have a tendency to pop up. As you probably noticed, I'm navigating a little bit here as moderator for the event, but I'm also managing and producing the questions that are coming in. So, but as we're chiming in on this particular poll, we have about 163 people answer out of our 259 on the call. And the question was, have you been on a virtual interview yet? And right now we've got about 23% of people saying yes, 42% of people saying no, and about 35% of people saying that it's coming up. Here's I think the next question, Dean and Pete, is what's the biggest challenge with virtual interviews? And the biggest result right now is not so much technology, although that's second. It's really team dynamics. How do you recommend that teams who are not in the same room work together in a virtual environment so that they can present effectively? And the second part of that question is, what if they can't socially distance in a room and present in the same room? Is there value of having 2 or 3 or 4 people on one camera presenting?
Pete, let me respond to the second part of that, which is just where you just went with multiple people on one camera. I've been in so many of those Zoom meetings over the last year. Most of them weren't interviews, they were interview preps. And there's something so flat and dull about so you're way back here, you know? You get small so quickly that when you disappear into the room, it's really hard to get the benefit of facial expression. So I'm not a big fan of doing the big room. Partly, it's like, imagine a movie without a close-up. If the entire movie was shot in a wide shot so you could see everyone, what we need to do is get up here so we can experience the person. So I don't like that, but there are scenarios where it makes sense. Let's just say if you wanted to feature a team, there's 2 people that say the selection committee is concerned that this engineer and this project manager haven't worked together before. Maybe you put 2 of them in a room and a camera, assuming we're past the social distancing. And you can see them tag team with each other on one screen. And maybe we have the team from Chicago on another screen, and maybe whoever the host is on a single screen. So there might be options to put 2 or 3 people together. The room interview, it's an option, but in my experience of it, you can't read anything except the person who's in the upper right and upper left.
Right. So in our experience working with interview teams over the course of the last 18 years, the single thing that any team can do to communicate team unity more than anything else is to pair up team members and have them present with each other. Not necessarily finish each other's sentences, but almost that, right? Just presenting on the same topic and basically taking turns talking about it. It's a fantastic way to communicate. We are so on the same page about this project.
So we're doing that for you now, and you'll notice it's harder. There's a 2-second delay that's going on. I looked for a spot to hop in, but Pete and I have pre-agreed it's okay to interrupt me. Go ahead and interrupt me, and when you do, I'm going to stop talking.
Right, and absolutely. Hopefully on the receiving end here, the audience is experiencing, boy, yeah, it really does come across as team when two people are making the same point together. So yeah, when you're in the same room together, obviously that's easier. When you are separated technology, there is potential for imperfections, but A, imperfections are okay, and B, if you practice and if you communicate in advance, okay, this is the part of the presentation where the two of us will talk about this one topic, then you can get it down and you can listen for those opportunities to dive in.
So Pete and I are doing pretty good here, and we're doing this because we've been practicing it. So one of the hardest parts in all the live interviews we've coached, you people all try to avoid rehearsing. It is like pulling teeth to get you to actually practice. And then hopefully we get a few runs in the second half of the last day because we couldn't get you to do the rehearsal. You want to start practicing sooner. If it's virtual interview, practice virtually. So I'm paying super close attention to Pete and a fair amount of attention to Troy so that I'm ready for their interaction and we practice together. But you can get this down. It's just a different experience, but you're paying more attention than you had to when you're in the room.
I want to add to the practice conversation. One of the participants said, we have tried and it seems like we get too bogged down in the technology aspect of our presentation and our presenters hide behind these issues rather than truly practicing. Then we lose team dynamics and message delivery. Any recommendation for getting over the anxiety or the frustration of the technology?
Here's mine. Let's say, let's say I'm the leader of an interview prep. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try to help the teams figure out what parts they're talking about. And as soon as they've got the slightest inkling, I'm going to say, well, let's just hear what it might sound like. Step back, let them pop in and try it. So imagine if you had, say, 3 days to prepare for an interview. You did a strategy session before, so you're basically planned. Now we're developing the messages and rehearsing them. On day one, before lunch, whoever came up with something that they would be talking about should have tried it. By lunch, hopefully everybody has taken a stab at some piece of their section. So it's getting rehearsal to start and integrating rehearsing with the process of figuring it out. So if I say, Pete, what are you going to say about pre-construction? And he says something, then, well, let's see it. Take a stab at it.
Yeah.
As soon as you start that, it'll get easier.
Yes, and what we found is it's the rest of the team's job, especially the leader's job, to yes and their team members. I have seen so many people step up and say, okay, let me take a risk and just think out loud here and give a draft of what I'm going to say on this topic. And they get it out, and then the leader goes, oh, I wouldn't say that at all. No, don't say that. Say this and this and this and this instead. So man, does that person regret actually having taken that risk.
I like that point. So your job as an interview prep coach, whether you do it for a living like we do or whether you're on the team, it is to build the confidence in the other people. The number one best thing that you can have is somebody who is confident when they're delivering to the prospect. And I'm telling you, it's more important than whether they're right or wrong. I would rather say the wrong thing with confidence than say the right thing hesitating to see if my boss is going to stomp on me or whatever team member didn't like the way I said it last time. So we hesitate, and that shows through. And this venue, just like the live venue, it's about winning someone over on the confidence. It's not about always being right.
Right. Right. And the reason for that, by the way, is so much of what an interview is about is giving the selection committee a sense of the kind of people that you are. Generally speaking, when you're interviewing, you have already proven to the selection committee that your team can do the job. You've got the qualifications. You know what you're talking about. Now it's the personality test, or it's the chemistry experiment that the selection committee is running. You are showing them what kind of folks you are, how you get along with each other, and how potentially you're going to get along with them.
So, hey, Troy, can I ask you if I can go a direction as time, time runs out really fast.
Absolutely.
As it will in an interview. We're starting to spot some new roles or variants on roles in the interview prep process that are coming clear to us because of this venue. Is that an appropriate direction to go?
Yes. Before we jump into that, let me hit one question that's come up a couple of times, and that's Q&A. Q&A is a question about how to avoid people talking over each other. And I know you talked a little bit about it, but if I had a Q&A for the two of you, are there some quick tips you can refresh for maybe people that didn't miss it the first time around or came in late? What are your tips for Q&A and how to not talk over each other?
So I'm going to give them and model them at the same time, and I'll be very brief for time's sake. The number one thing is learn to soundbite, learn to make your point, and when you make it, you stop and pause to let the other one hop in.
Right. And when that other person hops in, just look for your opportunity to augment what he or she just said or color it a little bit. Do not repeat the same point, but add a little bit of extra delicacy if you have something, and don't feel like you have to.
So the other thought is you're going to have to pull questions a little harder. There's something about that that puts us in TV mode. This venue separates us and we just sit and wait for somebody else to do something. You have to set up a Q&A a little ahead of time. So this is the kind of thing that we're doing more of. Group, in a couple minutes, we're going to ask you a question. Be thinking about X, Y, Z, and we're going to follow up with you, and we want to hear from you what you think. Present a little bit. Okay, let's come back to that question I raised earlier. Set people up for their questions and then tell them, I'm actually asking, let's hear from you. I'm going to give you a couple moments of silence and I want someone to answer that question. Those would be my two tips.
Excellent. Go ahead, Dean, and share the track you were heading down and your thoughts on that. And then I have a couple of things as we wrap up as we get to the top of the hour.
Okay, so a good metaphor for what's happening in this venue that's different from the live presentation is if you think about how TV news works, you've got an anchor, and that's kind of the main face of the news. And you have several anchors for different sections. Sometimes you've got the weather person and the regular news person, the sports person. Now, in front of them is this room, it's the switch booth. And there's a producer inside there who's saying, go to camera 2. He's the one with the headset. Go to camera 2. Let's cut to our reporter out in the field. Bring up the map of Minnesota. So what it's showing us is that as this evolves so that the format allows us more control over what our prospects see, we're going to start having a role that's like a producer. You should have it now. Troy is our producer for this right now. He's running things, so I don't have to worry about the tech. So you got a producer who's not in the interview, who's producing the visual. And as more control emerges, it's going to be less like a PowerPoint that's always taking us through our presentation. And it's going to be a little bit more like, bring up the site map. Let's show the 3 different orientations on the building. Let's look at our team graphics. So it's graphics come up when needed. And this switcher person is going to decide, when is it on Pete? When is it on me? When is it a group shot? So that's role number 1, is a producer. That's the person who should be collaborating with the prospects and getting answers and getting on the same page for what interview experience to create. The other one is more like the anchor itself, the person who's the face of the interview. We don't do this in live interviewing because it looks like you're too controlling, like you don't trust your team. But this format benefits from a host, an anchor, a main person that brings continuity across the interview and may set up the next section and pass it to someone else. So you want to have these rules. This person's on the interview. It's kind of like if you imagine a late night talk show without a host. It's just all the different movie stars that come up and talk about their next movie. The face of a David Letterman who brings continuity to the whole show is now a role in your interview. It can be more or less obvious. It can be somewhat cloaked, but establish who is the anchor of the interview and who are those other anchors for different sections, and have a producer who's not going to be in the interview, who is going to run the thing.
Yep. And by the way, the reason we find the difference to be present is when you're all in a room with selection committees, they can sort of mentally zoom out and look at the whole team and kind of assess, okay, there's the person in charge. There's the person who's kind of calling the shots. When you're in a virtual interview, you don't know exactly what they're going to see. It's quite possible that all they're seeing is just a series of talking heads. And they'll never see more than one person at a time. It's really hard for them to get a sense of who is the main person here, especially if you have like one or more subject matter experts that's talking on a topic for a long time. So if there's a person that just keeps bringing it back home, you know, that kind of is a traffic director or an organizer of information, then that communicates to the selection committee, okay, this is the person in charge.
One thing I do want to comment on for all of those who are asking questions throughout this process, I know we're not going to get to all of your questions. So what we'll do at the end of this presentation is review everything that came through the questions as well as in the chat window. And we'll be sending a follow-up to answer some of those key questions. So if you missed the first part of this, you'll be able to get some additional information on that as well. In our last few minutes, if you had to pick and this question just came in right now, which I think is great. If you had to pick the single most important item to keep in mind when you're doing a virtual conference, what would it be?
It's so easy, and it fits here better than anywhere else, but it's a truism in a lot of aspects of presentation life. If it really came down to one thing, be happy. The effect that you get when you bring joy into this experience is completely different. And we don't always get it back, but this is a time to think of what can I bring? What can I give? My gift is my joy. So I'm going to appreciate you. I'm going to care about you, and I'm going to be happy. And this is how, I mean, you have no idea what it felt like to be in here when our tech wasn't working at 1:03, that we didn't have video at 1:03 today. Heart's beating, sweating, turning red. You know what? I brought my joy. So that's the one thing that I would bring down to. I appreciate my audience, and I'm going to bring you my joy. I'm going to have fun with this process, and that sells.
Yep. Yeah. So I'm just going to echo that. I'm not going to add a second one because I completely agree. Interviews are stressful and potentially frustrating enough that if you bring in a couple of mysteries involved with technology that I don't quite understand and virtual communication that I haven't quite wrapped my brain around, you can really key yourself up. And like I was saying earlier, the selection committee wants to know what kind of people you guys are. What is it like to be on the receiving end of information from them? What's it like to just have a conversation with them? And if you come across like you're really high-strung and nervous because this is so dang important, yes, they're gonna appreciate that you think it's important, but it's like, oh my gosh, this person is exhausting. So enjoy it, appreciate the opportunity to help them. If you think about it as you spending some time with your selection committee to help them around this really challenging project that they have, then you can get out of your head and into their head, and you can show up positive and enjoyable all at the same time.
One final poll for you all this afternoon. I'm going to launch another poll as we get to the tail end of our session here, and that is additional webinar topics. I'm going to launch that poll now, so watch for the pop-up menu. Hopefully you see it on the screen there. Look around your screen for the pop-up menu. I've seen it's green letters if you're watching from an iPhone at the top of the screen. But the question that we have is, what additional webinar topics would be of most interest to you during this crucial time? owner insight, and that's where we would have a panel discussion with some of the owners in the industry, those that might work in various industries. They could talk about what they're experiencing on their virtual interviews and what tips they have for you to make your next interview a powerful one. We can also talk about business development in a virtual world, telling your story in uncertain times, leadership presence, or all of the above. So please feel free to take a look at that poll. I'm going to leave that poll up as we enter the last 5 minutes here. I think, Dean and Pete, my last question for you, and I think this is true of kind of what you touched upon in the last one about being happy, but kind of high level approach to actually taking on an interview prep, whether it's virtual or live. What are the key things that you see are most important for teams to think about as they prepare for that interview? Pete, why don't you start?
Well, man, the biggest place that we recommend having people think about an interview is what's the strategy here, and the way to get there is to start getting into the heads of the selection committee. Who is it that you're going to be talking to? Why are they doing this project right now? What's their definition of success? And what challenge are they experiencing? What business challenges are they experiencing right now that's making them do this project? There's a whole host of questions to consider and to process and to research, to actually talk to people inside or around the owner organization in order to really wrap your brain around what's going on for them so that you can show up with recommendations that's actually going to help them.
That's a great answer, and I'm not really going to give a different one. Just want to remind people, the reason you strategize is there are 3 basic phases. The first is to come upon what's most important, what is our point of view, and how are we going to go about sharing it. And strategies, what you're strategizing is your approach to the interview. And you then got message design. How can we design all of our messages so they live up to the strategy we came up with and that they will fit in our approach? And then lastly, you've got the rehearsal. And we're recommending you kind of integrate the rehearsal along with the process of developing your messages, but ultimately prepare to practice a little bit more because this is harder. And it's really different to be co-presenting with my 2 colleagues who are not in the room with me. So this takes a little bit more practice than usual, at least for a while. It might turn out that after a year, this is less prep, but I think it's a little bit more like introducing elements of television show programming into it. And so I think it's harder. For now, I would expect to practice more.
You know, as I think about this time in history, I really think this is an opportunity to get teams and organizations to actually treat this with the seriousness that it deserves. We have actually worked with a number of teams who say, oh yeah, you know, we prepare for interviews. I mean, you know, as we're driving to the interview, we talk about it. Which has always blown my mind. I mean, that is the opposite of preparation if you're waiting till you drive to the interview to even start talking about it. It seems to me that because of this this circumstance that we're in that requires virtual presentation, virtual interviewing, we are being forced to practice more. And hopefully what that means is it's going to apply to all of our interviews. We're all going to get into a pattern of practicing more, thinking about this more, figuring out what it is we need to say to them that's really going to make the difference to them.
Excellent. Thanks, Dean and Pete. And for all of you out there who are tuning in and listening, thank you so much for taking your time today. We at SagePresence recognize and understand that this is an unprecedented time. And we have nothing but compassion and grace for all of you as you work through these new dynamics. We're here to help you with your confident presence, and we look forward to continuing to provide insight and guidance for you along the way. I'm going to put up information here, so if you do want to reach out to us and get additional information, you can reach out to us at any time. Also, lastly, stay connected to both our Facebook page, our LinkedIn page, as well as our email list. We'll be putting out some more information about upcoming webinars to help you through this time. So thank you and have a wonderful day.